Hello and welcome to this video where we will take a look at the game Smyslov Darga, played at the Amsterdam Interzonal 1964. Most likely this game doesn't sound like familiar to you, or maybe you don't recognize why would I be taking a look at this game. But the reason I'm doing so is to show you that great ideas in chess actually transcend time, and they can be used whenever the situation is appropriate to do so. And in this game we will actually see Vasily Smyslov, a former world champion by that time, use an idea by Jose Raul Capablanca. And by showing you this game, I would like to show how this came to pass, and how you can also learn to recognize situations where you can use ideas played by the great players. So let's take a look at the game. Smyslov started with knight f3, knight f6, g3, d5, bishop g2, bishop g4, c4, c6. So we have the reti opening, and black chose one of the most solid setups against it. As a matter of fact, the move bishop g4, the setup with bishop g4, is known as the Capablanca setup against the reti. This is not why I'm showing you the game, by the way, but it's curious that the game also features another Capablanca invention, which is the development of the bishop to g4 against the reti. As comparison, developing the bishop to f5 in the reti is known as the Lasker's system against it. So in this position, Smyslov went for the move c takes d5, and Darga simply captures c takes d5. Nowadays, this is not considered as the most precise way to deal with this variation. In fact, today's theory claims that bishop f3, inserting this exchange, bishop takes f3 and cd5, followed by e6, knight c6, and so forth, gives black an extremely solid position, and that is a good compensation for white's pair of bishops. So modern theory claims that black is fine here, but of course there have been attempts, and this line was somewhat popular several years ago, maybe even more, when white tried to squeeze some water from stone in these positions. But let's go back to the game, cd5, and the reason why this is not considered as the most precise way is the move knight e5, as now white avoids the exchange and harasses that bishop on g4. So the bishop now is a bit uncomfortable, because it's not so easy to find a good spot, and Darga drops it back all the way to c8. The point being that the b7 pawn is vulnerable when the bishop is not on c8. So in case of something like bishop f5, let's say, the move queen b3 can put an unpleasant pressure on the b7 pawn. So bishop c8, safely defending the pawn on b7, but on the other hand, having wasted time with the bishop going here and there. It's a waste of time, but black hopes that in a closed position this won't matter much. So short castle by white, and now e6. So we saw that the idea to develop the bishop more actively failed, but black is hoping and banking on the solidity of the position and the symmetrical nature of the pawn structure. So knight c3, bishop e7, d4, short castle, and bishop f4, developing the bishop actively. In case, for example, here black decides to harass that bishop with knight h5, the bishop will drop back to d2, and white will argue that he had won a tempo because the knight on h5 is really out of the game, and if knight f6, then white had won a free tempo with developing bishop d2, and now it's white's turn to play, so he can further continue, maybe queen b3, maybe rook c1, and so forth. In the game, Darga continued with bishop d7, still trying to make some use with the bishop. With bishop d7, black is actually preparing knight c6, and in case of knight c6, wants to capture on c6 with the bishop. To compare, if immediately knight c6, then knight c6, bc6, and black is saddled with a backward pawn on c6 and a weak square on c5, which white will gladly use with ideas like, let's say, maybe knight e4 immediately, rook c1, targeting the pawn, targeting the square, with excellent play for white. So bishop d7, and now Smyslov immediately takes advantage of black's last move with the move queen b3. We mentioned this idea when the pawn on b7 is not protected. Queen b3 is actually a very annoying move to make. So dark guy's idea was to go queen b6 and offer exchange of queens, but after queen b6, a b6, now we see that black is saddled with these doubled pawns. For the time being, white can't really take advantage of those doubled pawns, but they are a long-term problem, or can be a long-term problem. For the time being, though, black is perfectly fine. So Smyslov's next decision is actually another long-term decision, and he played the move knight takes d7. So you could say, okay, what is this? Why would white trade a beautiful knight on e5 for a pretty passive and bad bishop on d7? But the reasons there are two reasons for this. The first one, let's say the long-term one, is that white is gaining the advantage of the bishop pair. It doesn't matter much now, especially as the bishop on g2 is, well, actually not doing much because it's limited by this pawn structure in the center by black, but it's a long-term advantage, and we will see in one line later on how this bishop can come to life and help white's improvement of the position. So first point, pair of bishops. The second point is that, for example, if white had continued something like rook fc1, black's idea after bishop d7, as we mentioned, was knight c6, but also there is another idea of bishop c6. And now the bishop is actually quite effectively blocking the c-file, and black intends to continue with knight b7, and the point being that if knight takes c6 now, gaining the bishop pair, will be met by bc6, and black successfully straightened his pawn structure. So you could say that Smyslov's decision was first a long-term decision to gain the bishop pair, but also a prophylactic one, preventing black's idea of bishop c6. So he took on d7, knight b7, and now occupied the c-file with rook fc1. Black does the same, rook fc8, a3 now. A useful little move, taking control over the b4 square, and just a little bit improving the position. Rook c6 now by black, probably intending to double on the c-file. Yeah, and now comes the key point in the game. So up to this point, things have been developing relatively normally, maybe you could say even in an expected way. And we reach this position, which is approximately, well, balanced. White has the bishop pair and a slightly better pawn structure, but black is extremely solid. The bishops do not show any particular activity. And the question here for white is how to continue, how to further make some progress or improve at least the position. And next move is an amazing one. I would say in two ways. One is that it shows that well, as I said in the beginning, great ideas in chess are timeless. So you could, if you had seen the original, then you would say, ha, amazing, yeah. White uses this timeless idea by Capablanca. And the second is because it's quite appropriate for this position, even though it may not seem so at first sight. So if I won't keep you too much in kind of waiting what white's next move will be, and I will just play it and then I will explain what's going on here. White's next move is the move bishop d2. And now, those of you who perhaps know the original or know a bit of chess history will immediately recall the famous game Janowski-Capablanca, where the great Cuban played a similar move in a similar structure. I will now show you the original of that, the original implementation of this idea. But before doing so, I will add that the idea of bishop d2 is that white intends to embark on a long-term plan to improve his position, and for that he needs to have the bishop secure if he is to keep the advantage of the bishop pair. So what is white's idea? White's idea is to go e3, and now we understand that the bishop on f4 would be stranded after e3, subject to some ideas like h6 g5 being maybe even trapped, or by some knight h5, knight f4 being exchanged. So the bishop needs to be safe on d2 if white wants to keep the bishop pair. And after f3, we will see that white wants to continue with the bishop f1, bishop d3, improving the position of the light squared bishop, looking down both sides of the board, and then f3, possibly preparing g4 or e4. So this is white's general plan of improvement of the position. So this is the long-term plan that Smyslov had in mind by playing the move bishop d2. But as I promised, let me show you the original. Yeah, so we'll move back to the starting position and we'll flip the board because Capablanca was playing with the black pieces. So d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, bishop f5. Not the best move by black, but Capablanca, okay, just experimented in the opening in this game. Queen b3, also not best by white. He should have inserted c takes d5 first. Queen b6 by black, takes on b6, a b6, c d5, and now knight d5. This is the difference why white should have played c d5 before playing queen b3, because in that case black would have been forced to take with a pawn and would not have been able in this position to exchange the knights, which is in his favor. So knight e5, c d5, e3, knight c6. You can see that the structure is actually the same, only in this case Capablanca is the one with the double pawns, but you will soon see how he manages to use these double pawns in his advantage. Bishop d2, and here comes the star move, bishop d7. Again, very surprising, because you would think, okay, the bishop is very nicely placed on the b1 h7 diagonal, it's active, it's not a bad piece at all. But what Capablanca does is voluntarily bearing the bishop on d7, and after bishop e2 playing e6. You see, very the same as Smyslov, but the idea is similar. Only in this case, Capablanca's idea of bishop d7 is actually to help his play on the queen side. He wants to go knight a5, and he needs the bishop on d7 to cover the b5 square, so he can go b5 and then knight c4 and take control over the queen side. So you see how great players think very concretely. They don't stay on the surface with conclusions like, okay, the bishop is active, so why should I voluntarily bear it on d7 and play e6 and stuff like that? Because they think in terms of plans and what they can do on a more general basis, on a more, let's say, conceptual basis, how they can improve the position. And if that means that some piece needs to be more effective at what seemingly seems like a passive square, they will do it without problems. We see here Capablanca do it, and we also saw Smyslov do it. If you haven't checked this game, I wholeheartedly recommend you do so. Janowski Capablanca, New York tournament, 1916. I actually took a look at this game in great detail in my course on Chessable dedicated to Capablanca's endgame technique. You can take a look at it if you feel like. It was a very instructive game, and if you have a possibility to take a look at it with my analysis, I would recommend you do so, because I really discovered a lot of useful things in this game. So one way or another, take a look at the game. It's a fantastic game by the great Cuban champion. Now let's go back to our game, Smyslov Darga. I'll flip the board again. So we are after move bishop d2. So in this position, Darga played the move rook d8. And you would say, why rook d8? Wasn't the idea to go rook ac8? Well, it was. And we will see actually that Darga is here thinking in a kind of a more prophylactic way, because he was worried that perhaps white is planning to go e4. So not e3 as we mentioned, but actually e4. And then after d4, let's say the rook is actually quite well placed on the d file. So it's a prophylactic move that wants to deal with the possibility of opening the position with e4. So the move that Smyslov played, bishop d2, also introduced the idea of e4, yeah, which may or may not work, but it's something for the opponent to worry about. And here we see Darga worry about it and play a prophylactic move rook d8, which anticipates the possible opening of the d file in case of e4, d takes e4. So this prophylactics being in place, Smyslov actually goes e3, and already outlining, we already outlined the plan he had in mind. To show you some, let's say, ideas how this could work, let's say rook dc8. Now e4 may be possible again, yeah, but let's just take a look at the plan I just outlined. f3 first, covering the e4 and g4 squares, so the knight on f6 is limited. Let's say king f8 and bishop f1. This is a standard plan for white in these positions when having the bishop pair, unopposed light squared bishop, which let's say after knight b8 for something, yeah, can go, let's say, to d3, and it's very good bishop unopposed looking down both sides when white can prepare, or the central push with e4. After d4 fe4 he'll have a full pawn center, or simply advancing on the king side g4 g5 h4 and so forth. Yeah? So white can play with these two ideas, advancing g4 on the king side or advancing in the center with e4. Yeah? This can also be combined with some play, maybe knight f4 at some point, targeting the b6 pawn, thinking about the possibility of exchanging rooks or keeping one pair of rooks or two pairs of rooks on the board. So the long-term advantage that Smyslov obtained with the bishop pair, you see how it's actually shown by giving white all these long-term possibilities to vary his plans, whereas black is, yes, very solid, but without any active possibilities, and this makes it a bit uncomfortable to play long term because he needs to be aware of white's possible plans and always be prepared to act and counteract accordingly. So in the game after e3, Darga was perhaps concerned that, okay, maybe white abandoned this idea of e4, maybe he just wants to go long term f3, bishop f1 as we mentioned, and he played the move knight e8. Makes sense, because if white now goes something like f3, bishop d3, black can go f5, knight d6, and this looks pretty good if you look at it, because the knight is targeting c4, can come to c4, and the pawn on f5 and a pawn on d5 nicely climb down on the e4 square, so this makes it more difficult for white to go to push through e4, and also the g4 advance is also controlled by that pawn on f5. So it makes perfect sense. And we see here grandmasters playing prophylactically. However, what Darga missed is that actually by moving the knight from f6 and from the center prematurely, he allowed Smyslov to actually change his plans and now go for e4. So all of a sudden there is a sudden transformation where the slow maneuvering nature of the position is changed into a more dynamic and more concrete one when white opens the game for the light squared bishop. And all this is thanks to the absence of the knight from f6, because now there is no enough control over the e4 square, and e4 is very powerful because he attacks the pawn on d5 3 times. Black cannot defend it, so black must take d takes e4, and now after bishop e4 we see the power of the unopposed light squared bishop. Yeah? So it was a really good decision to take knight d7 earlier in the game. So the bishop is extremely strong, and with the opening of the position, the doubled pawns, which we said were not of much of a problem for black thanks to the closed nature of the position, now in an open position they are actually quite vulnerable, as we can see, especially the pawn on b7. So already it's a very difficult position for black to play, and we can conclude that it's certain that Darga missed this e4 move after white played e3 first, and well, these moves are sometimes hard to foresee or expect, especially as white seemed set out to follow one course of action, but then suddenly changing the plan and stepping on a completely different path, which is quite different from the, let's say, long-term static plan of the f3, bishop f1, bishop d3 idea, with the change in the dynamics and the tempo of the game by opening the game with e4. So the rook is attacked. Darga went rook c4, trying to counterattack the pawn on d4, and now knight b5, defending the pawn on d4 and wanting to exchange the active rook. After rook c1, we see black's problem, which is the b7 pawn. And the position is already lost for black, surprisingly. Yeah, but if you just compare the activity of the pieces, knight on b5, rook on c1, bishop on e4, compared to all these pieces by black, which are stuck on these four squares, d8, d8, e7, d7, it's clear that, well, this big difference in activity should give white a decisive advantage. Darga tried the tactical trick knight c5 based on the fact that the rook on d8 is targeting the bishop on d2, but the simple operation d takes e5, rook takes b2, c takes b6, rook takes b2, attacking the knight on b5, but now a4, defending the knight, simply seals black's fate because b7 cannot be defended, and also there is an idea of rook c8 pinning the knight, and basically it will be game over because when white captures the pawn on b7, the pawn on b6 won't be far off from queening. So black played king f8, white played rook c8, and black resigned because apart from bishop b7 there is the threat of knight c7 and winning that knight on e8. So 25 moves of very quick victory for Smyslov, and I would say a game full of unexpected turns, but I think one that nicely illustrates this timeless feature of great chess ideas. And also, well, I think it's very nice that Smyslov managed not only to implement Capablanca's idea in the long-term way, as Capablanca did in his game, but also to use the peculiarities of the position he had and was flexible enough in his thinking to change the nature of the game when that was favorable for him. So with this, I will conclude the analysis of this classical game, Smyslov Darga, from this Amsterdam Interzonal 1964. And yeah, I will thank you for being here watching this, and I will maybe do a Nakamura. I noticed this, that when I was watching his recaps from the candidates, he would always finish his recaps with the make sure you smash that subscribe button if you like the content. So I won't ask you to smash it, but I would kindly ask you to subscribe if you like the content, if you like to support me, and I will thank you for that. Well, also stay in touch in the comments, tell me what you think, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to my newsletter on Substack, which this newsletter is always connected with the video that I'm posting, and this week's newsletter was about my experience analyzing with the world champion. So take a look at that one, Substack. You can see the link in the description of this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon again. Take care.